Marcus Webb pulled into the grocery store parking lot at 6:47 a.m., earlier than he preferred but necessary given his physical therapy appointment later that morning. At 52, the retired Army sergeant still moved with military precision, though the limp in his right leg, a souvenir from Fallujah, made every step a reminder of what he'd left on foreign soil. His pickup truck bore the distinguishing marks of a veteran who'd never sought attention for his service. A small Purple Heart license plate frame, faded Support Our Troops sticker, and nothing else. No bumper stickers proclaiming his rank. No flags or slogans. Just quiet dignity and the kind of exhaustion that came from 2 decades of military service followed by years of navigating a civilian world that didn't quite know what to do with broken soldiers. Marcus parked in a spot near the entrance, not a handicapped space, though his VA paperwork said he qualified. He'd never been comfortable with that label. The spot he chose had a blue-painted curb designated for 15-minute quick stops. He'd be in and out in 10 minutes. Just needed his prescription refill and some coffee. He locked his truck and headed inside, his gait uneven but determined. What Marcus didn't notice was the parking enforcement officer who'd been watching from across the lot. Dennis Kowalski had worked parking enforcement for the city of Philadelphia for 7 years, and he'd developed a particular reputation in that time. Among business owners on his route, he was known as the Vulture, a man who seemed to take personal satisfaction in writing tickets, who'd wait by expired meters counting down the final seconds before slapping a citation on the windshield. Dennis saw Marcus's truck pull into the blue curb zone and immediately started his timer. 15 minutes. He'd give it exactly 15 minutes and 1 second, then he'd write the ticket. Maybe even call for a tow if the guy took too long. It was 6:48 a.m. The street was empty. There were dozens of open parking spots. But Dennis had his quota to meet, and more importantly, he had his authority to exercise. Inside the grocery store, Marcus waited at the pharmacy counter while the technician processed his refill. The system was running slow. Something about insurance verification. What should have taken 5 minutes stretched to 10, then 12. "I'm sorry, sir," the pharmacy tech said, genuinely apologetic. "The system's been acting up all morning." Just a few more minutes. Marcus nodded patiently. He'd learned patience in the Army, the hurry up and wait that defined military life. A few extra minutes at a pharmacy counter was nothing compared to the weeks he'd spent in forward operating bases waiting for orders. At 7:04 a.m., 16 minutes after Marcus had parked, Dennis approached the pickup truck with his citation book already open. He circled the vehicle, noting the Purple Heart license plate frame, the veteran stickers, the overall condition of the truck. Well-maintained, but clearly not new. Dennis didn't care. Rules were rules. The truck had been there more than 15 minutes. That meant a ticket. He was writing the citation when Marcus emerged from the grocery store, prescription bag in hand, moving as quickly as his injured leg allowed. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, his tone respectful but urgent. "I'm right here." Just took a little longer than expected. Dennis didn't look up from his ticket book. "Vehicle's been here 17 minutes. Blue zone is 15-minute maximum." "I understand that. The pharmacy was slow. I'm moving it right now." "Too late." Citation's already written. Marcus approached, trying to read the officer's name tag. "Officer Kowalski, I'm a disabled veteran. My leg, it takes me a little longer to get around. I was only a couple minutes over." Dennis finally looked up, his expression somewhere between bored and annoyed. "Disabled parking is over there." He gestured to the handicapped spaces. "You don't get to park in a blue zone just because you're a veteran." "I wasn't trying to use my veteran status." "I'm just explaining why I took a little longer." "Doesn't matter. Rules apply to everyone." Dennis tore off the ticket and held it out. "That'll be $75. You can contest it if you want, but you'll lose." Marcus took the ticket, his jaw tightening. He'd dealt with enough petty bureaucrats in his life to know when arguing was pointless. "Fine. I'll pay it." "Actually," Dennis said, his tone shifting to something that sounded almost pleased, "I'm calling for a tow." "What? Why?" "Vehicle's been in violation for 17 minutes. City ordinance allows me to authorize towing after 15 minutes in a blue zone. That's excessive. I'm here. I'm moving it right now. Should have thought of that before you parked illegally. Dennis pulled out his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 34. Need a tow truck at Harrison Street Grocery, blue zone violation. Marcus felt anger rising. The kind of anger he'd learned to control through years of military discipline, but anger nonetheless. This is ridiculous. You're towing a disabled veteran's truck over 2 minutes? I'm towing an illegally parked vehicle. Your veteran status doesn't give you special privileges. I'm not asking for special privileges. I'm asking for basic human decency. Dennis's expression hardened. Maybe if you'd served your country, you'd understand that rules exist for a reason. The words hung in the air like a slap. Marcus stared at the parking officer, processing what he'd just heard. You think I didn't serve my country? I think people throw around veteran like it means something these days. Buy a Purple Heart sticker at the Army surplus store, think it gets you out of tickets. That's not a sticker. That's a legitimate plate frame from the VA. Sure it is. Dennis's tone dripped with sarcasm. Let me guess. You were Special Forces? Navy? SEAL? Everyone's a war hero these days. Marcus took a slow breath, his fists clenching at his sides. I was Army. Sergeant. 2 tours in Iraq. Got hit by an IED in Fallujah. That's why I limp. That's why I sometimes take a little longer getting in and out of stores. And that license plate frame? That's for the Purple Heart I earned while my convoy was being shot at. Compelling story. Dennis gestured to the tow truck that was pulling into the parking lot with surprising speed. Now, move aside so they can hook up your vehicle. Other shoppers were stopping to watch now. A woman with a grocery cart, an elderly man getting out of his car, a teenager recording on his phone. The tow truck driver, a man in his 30s named Ray, approached the pickup truck and paused, seeing the Purple Heart frame. He looked at Dennis. You sure about this? Guy's a vet. I'm sure. Hook it up. Ray hesitated, then looked at Marcus. Sir, you have someone you can call? Get this sorted out? Marcus's mind raced. He could call his daughter, but she was 2 hours away. He could call his VA caseworker, but that would take hours to resolve. Or he could call the one person who might actually be able to fix this immediately, though making that call would reveal something Marcus had carefully kept private. Give me a minute, Marcus said quietly. He pulled out his phone and stepped away from the growing crowd, dialing a number he rarely used during business hours. The voice that answered was crisp, professional. Commissioner Webb's office. Janet, it's Marcus. I need to speak with him. Mr. Webb, he's in a meeting. It's urgent. There was a pause. Then, hold, please. 30 seconds later, a familiar voice came on the line. Marcus? What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine, Thomas. But I'm about to have my truck towed by one of your parking enforcement officers for being 2 minutes over the limit in a blue zone. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, which officer? Kowalski, Unit 34. Another pause. Where are you? Harrison Street Grocery. Don't let them tow the truck. I'm 5 minutes away. The line went dead. Marcus walked back to where Dennis was directing Ray to position the tow truck. The truck's not being towed. Dennis laughed. Yes, it is. You can't just decide I made a phone call. The tow's been canceled. Called your lawyer? Good luck with that. By the time any lawyer gets here, your truck will be in the impound lot. I didn't call a lawyer. A dark sedan pulled into the parking lot at that moment, moving with purpose. It parked directly behind the tow truck, blocking it in. The door opened, and a man in his late 50s stepped out. Salt and pepper hair, expensive suit, the kind of presence that made everyone stop talking. Thomas Carrington, Philadelphia's City Transportation Commissioner, walked directly to Marcus. You all right? I'm fine. Just dealing with an overzealous enforcement officer. Thomas turned to Dennis, his expression hardening. Officer Kowalski? Dennis's face had gone pale. He recognized the commissioner. Everyone in the parking enforcement division knew what Thomas Carrington looked like. Sir, I was just... You were just what? towing a disabled veteran's vehicle for being 2 minutes over the parking limit? The rules state—" "I wrote those rules," Thomas interrupted, "and they include enforcement discretion, especially for disabled individuals. Did you exercise any discretion?" "Sir, he wasn't parked in a handicapped space because he chose not to use one, even though he qualifies. Do you know why he qualifies, Officer Kowalski?" Dennis didn't answer. "Because he took shrapnel in his right leg while serving in Fallujah. He spent 6 months in Walter Reed. He was medically retired from the Army after 20 years of service. And you just told him that his Purple Heart frame was probably fake and questioned whether he actually served his country." The parking lot had gone completely silent. The teenager was still recording. Other shoppers had stopped to watch. Dennis's mouth opened and closed. "I didn't know." "That's the problem. You didn't know, and you didn't care to know. You saw an opportunity to write a ticket and call a tow, and you took it without considering the circumstances or exercising basic human compassion." "Sir, I was following procedure." "You were being a bully." Thomas's voice was cold. "You were using your authority to harass someone you perceived as powerless. And you got unlucky, because the man you chose to harass is my brother-in-law." The revelation rippled through the small crowd. Dennis looked like he might be sick. "Commissioner, I apologize. I didn't realize." "That's exactly the point. You shouldn't need to realize who someone is related to in order to treat them with respect. Every person you encounter deserves basic human dignity, regardless of whether they have connections to city leadership." Thomas turned to Marcus. "Did he actually question whether your service was real?" Marcus nodded. "Implied I bought the Purple Heart frame at a surplus store. Said everyone claims to be a war hero these days." Thomas's jaw tightened. He turned back to Dennis. "You're suspended. Effective immediately. Turn in your citation book and radio. Sir, please. You just accused a decorated combat veteran of stolen valor while preparing to tow his vehicle over a 2-minute parking violation. That's not the kind of judgment we need in this department." Ray, the tow truck driver, had disconnected his equipment and was quietly preparing to leave. "Commissioner, for what it's worth, I told him this seemed excessive." "I appreciate that, Ray. Send your invoice to my office. You'll be paid for the call even though no tow was completed." Ray nodded and drove away, clearly relieved to be leaving the situation. Dennis stood frozen, his face a mixture of shame and panic. Other shoppers were recording now. This was going to be all over social media within the hour. The elderly man who'd been watching approached Marcus. "Thank you for your service, son." What that officer did was shameful. Other shoppers murmured agreement. The woman with the grocery cart offered to pay Marcus's parking ticket. The teenager who'd been recording posted the video with the caption, "Parking enforcement officer harasses disabled veteran, gets confronted by city transportation commissioner." Within 3 hours, it had 50,000 views. Thomas waited until Dennis had surrendered his equipment and left the parking lot before turning to Marcus. "I'm sorry that happened. It's not your fault. It is, actually. I oversee parking enforcement. If officers in my department think this kind of behavior is acceptable, that's a failure of leadership." They stood in silence for a moment. Two men who'd known each other for over a decade. Thomas had married Marcus's younger sister 15 years ago, but who rarely discussed work. "You never told anyone at the city who I was," Marcus said quietly. "Your staff probably doesn't even know you're related to a veteran. You asked me not to. You didn't want special treatment. I still don't. But maybe." Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe there are other veterans dealing with enforcement officers who don't exercise discretion." "Maybe this isn't just about me." Thomas nodded slowly. "You're right. This is systemic." He pulled out his phone. "Janet, clear my morning. I need to call an emergency meeting with all parking enforcement supervisors and pull the citation records for the last 6 months. I want to see patterns of who's writing the most tickets and under what circumstances." After the call, Thomas looked at Marcus. "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a reason to fix something that's been broken." "I've had complaints about aggressive enforcement, but I hadn't prioritized addressing it. Today, you showed me why that was a mistake. The video of the confrontation went viral. Local news picked it up. Veterans advocacy groups shared it. Within a week, it had been viewed over 1 million times. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of Marcus, critical of Dennis, and appreciative of Thomas's response. But they also sparked a broader conversation about how enforcement officers treated vulnerable populations. Veterans, disabled individuals, elderly people, anyone who might need a moment of grace rather than strict rule enforcement. 2 weeks later, Thomas held a press conference announcing reforms to the Parking Enforcement Division. Mandatory training on discretion and de-escalation, new guidelines for enforcement in cases involving disabled individuals, a complaint review process for citizens who felt they'd been treated unfairly, and a zero-tolerance policy for officers who showed bias or disrespect. Dennis Kowalski was terminated after a review hearing revealed a pattern of aggressive enforcement, particularly targeting older vehicles and individuals who appeared to be lower income. He'd built a reputation for meeting his quota through quantity rather than focusing on genuine violations. 3 months after the incident, Marcus received a letter from the city. Inside was a full refund of the $75 ticket, along with a formal apology from the Parking Enforcement Division. But more meaningfully, he also received letters from other veterans who'd seen the video and felt empowered to speak up about their own experiences with dismissive treatment. Some had been harassed by parking officers. Others had dealt with clerks, security guards, or bureaucrats who questioned their service or dismissed their disabilities. Each letter thanked Marcus for standing up, for not just accepting the mistreatment, for using his connection to someone with power to create change rather than just solve his personal problem. One letter particularly moved him. It was from a young Marine veteran who'd been towed from a grocery store parking lot while inside having a PTSD episode triggered by sudden loud noises. The parking officer had shown no compassion, had refused to wait for the veteran to recover enough to move his vehicle. "I saw your video," the Marine wrote, "and I filed a complaint with the new process Commissioner Carrington created. They reviewed my case, refunded my towing fees, and the officer was required to complete veterans awareness training. Thank you for speaking up. You helped more people than just yourself." 6 months after the incident, Marcus was invited to speak at a city council meeting about enforcement reform. He was nervous. Public speaking had never been his strength, but Thomas encouraged him. Standing before the council, Marcus spoke plainly. "I didn't think being 2 minutes over in a parking zone was a big deal until an enforcement officer treated my military service as something to mock. That moment showed me how easily people in positions of authority can abuse their power when they stop seeing the humanity in the people they're supposed to serve." He paused, looking around the room. "I was lucky. I had a connection to someone with the power to address the situation, but most veterans don't. Most disabled people don't. Most elderly individuals who take a little longer to move don't have a direct line to the Transportation Commissioner. What happened to me shouldn't require a family connection to be resolved. Basic human decency should be the standard, not the exception we have to fight for." The council gave him a standing ovation. A year after the parking lot confrontation, Dennis Kowalski reached out to Marcus through a mutual acquaintance. He asked if they could meet for coffee. Marcus almost declined. He'd moved on from the incident, had no desire to relive it. But something in the message suggested Dennis wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was looking for understanding. They met at a diner in South Philadelphia, neutral territory where neither man had history. Dennis looked different, less arrogant, more weathered. The termination had hit him hard. He'd struggled to find new work, had gone through some personal reckonings about who he'd become. "I owe you an apology," Dennis began. "A real one, not the desperate one I gave when I realized who your brother-in-law was." Marcus nodded, but said nothing. "I spent 7 years in that job thinking I was enforcing rules, maintaining order. But somewhere along the way I started enjoying the power more than the purpose. I liked being able to write tickets people couldn't contest, liked calling tows that would cost people hundreds of dollars, made me feel important." He stared at his coffee. Then you came along, and I saw an easy target. Older truck, veteran stickers that I assumed were fake, someone who looked like they'd just pay the ticket and move on. And I was cruel about it. Questioned your service, implied you were lying. Why? Marcus asked. Why go that far? Dennis was quiet for a long moment. My dad was Army. Served in Vietnam. Came back different. Angry, distant. He'd throw his service in people's faces, use it as an excuse for his behavior. By the time I was a teenager, I associated military service with my father's abuse. And I guess I started resenting veterans in general. That's not an excuse. No, it's not. It's an explanation, and it's something I'm working through with a therapist now. They sat in silence, two men on opposite sides of a moment that had changed both their lives. I lost my job, my reputation, my sense of identity, Dennis continued. Everything I thought made me important was gone, and I had to confront the reality that I'd been using my authority to hurt people because I enjoyed it. That's a hard thing to accept about yourself. What are you doing now? Marcus asked. Working retail, stocking shelves at a warehouse. It's humbling, which I probably needed, but I'm also volunteering. Volunteering? At a veterans support center, helping guys who are transitioning out of the military navigate civilian bureaucracy. It's my way of trying to make up for the harm I caused. Marcus studied the man across from him. A year ago, Dennis had been arrogant, cruel, dismissive. Now he seemed genuinely humbled, genuinely changed. I appreciate the apology, Marcus said finally, and I respect that you're trying to do better. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, but you deserve the chance to become a better person. We all do. They finished their coffee and parted ways, unlikely to become friends but no longer enemies. 2 years after the parking lot incident, Marcus was invited to speak at a law enforcement training conference about civilian police interactions. The invitation came from Thomas, who'd been asked to present on parking enforcement reforms and wanted Marcus to share the veteran's perspective. Standing before a room of officers, enforcement agents, and city officials, Marcus told the story honestly. The parking violation, the dismissive officer, the moment when his service was questioned, the viral video, the reforms that followed. Here's what I learned, Marcus concluded. Power without compassion is just cruelty with a badge. Rules without discretion are just excuses to hurt people. And enforcement without humanity creates systems that punish the vulnerable while protecting the privileged. He looked around the room. Every time you write a ticket, call a tow, issue a citation, you're not just enforcing rules, you're representing your city, your department, your values, and the people you encounter will remember how you treated them long after they've paid the fine. Ask yourself, do you want to be remembered as someone who exercised authority with wisdom and compassion, or someone who used their power to make difficult days even harder? The response was mixed. Some officers seemed defensive. Others looked thoughtful. A few approached him afterward with their own stories of moments when they'd chosen compassion over strict enforcement, and how those moments had changed outcomes, built community trust, prevented escalation. One parking enforcement officer, a woman in her 40s, thanked him. I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I've always tried to see the person, not just the violation. Your story reminded me why that matters. Thank you. 5 years after the parking lot incident, Marcus received an unexpected call from Thomas. I'm retiring, Thomas said. 58 is young, but I've done what I set out to do. The department's in better shape, the culture's changed, the reforms are holding. You've done good work, Marcus said sincerely. We've done good work. That day in the parking lot, you could have just paid the ticket, moved on, never told anyone, but you didn't. You used your connection to create change, and that change has touched thousands of people. I just made a phone call. You did more than that. You showed me that my department had a problem. You gave me the motivation to fix it, and you've spent the last 5 years speaking up about it, keeping the pressure on, making sure the reforms stuck. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You know what the strangest part is? I never wanted attention. Never wanted to be a poster child for veterans' rights or parking enforcement reform. I just wanted to get my prescription and go home. The best advocates are often the reluctant ones, Thomas said, because you're doing it for the right reasons, not for recognition. A decade after the parking lot incident, Marcus was interviewed for a documentary about veterans' advocacy. The filmmaker asked him if he had any regrets about how everything unfolded. Marcus thought about it. "I regret that it took having a connection to someone powerful to get justice. I regret that my story went viral while thousands of other veterans and disabled individuals deal with similar treatment every day without resolution. I regret that systemic change required public embarrassment rather than just basic human decency. But do I regret speaking up? Number, because that moment, as small and petty as it seemed at the time, became a catalyst for real change. Parking enforcement in Philadelphia operates differently now. Officers receive better training. There's accountability. And maybe, somewhere in the city, a veteran having a tough day gets shown a moment of grace instead of harsh enforcement because an officer remembered the reforms that came from my story." The documentary ended with footage of Marcus back at that same grocery store parking lot, pulling into a regular space now, not the blue zone, and walking into the store with his still-present limp. In voiceover, he said, "I don't need special treatment because I'm a veteran. I just need the same basic respect and dignity every person deserves. That's not asking for much. That's just asking to be human." The parking lot was quieter now. The blue zones still existed, but enforcement was balanced with discretion. Officers were trained to see circumstances, not just violations. And somewhere in the city, a parking enforcement officer who'd learned from reforms sparked by one viral video chose compassion over cruelty. Because one man had refused to accept that 2 minutes over the limit justified questioning his service, dismissing his sacrifice, and treating him as less than human. And that refusal, that simple act of calling his brother-in-law and saying, "This isn't right," had changed an entire system. Sometimes justice doesn't come from lawsuits or protests or lengthy bureaucratic processes. Sometimes it comes from one person with a connection making a phone call, and one leader with the power to change deciding that change was necessary. If this story resonated with you, remember, veterans deserve respect not because of who they're related to, but because of what they've sacrificed. Disabled individuals deserve dignity not as a favor, but as a right. And enforcement officers who abuse their authority don't just harm individuals, they harm the entire system's credibility. Share this with anyone in law enforcement, city services, or positions of authority. Remind them that power without compassion is just cruelty, and rules without discretion are just excuses to hurt vulnerable people. Subscribe to Real Justice. Stories for more tales of authority confronted, systems reformed, and the power of speaking up even when it's uncomfortable. Thank you for watching. Remember, the veteran you dismiss today might have connections you never expected. But that shouldn't matter. Treat everyone with dignity, not because they might know someone powerful, but because dignity should be universal.